Well, welcome listeners to this our 17th. Hannah does odd numbers because she's odd.
That's so true.
Our 17th. I know, right? It was a good one. It was a good one.
That was so good. I'll get you back later.
I was so scrambling there. So this is our 17th episode of the Non-Existent Story, a storytelling, story listening, story inventing, story stealing podcast in which each week we present excerpts and summaries from two stories, one that exists and one that does not, and then the story listener has to guess which is which. So this week, mercifully, Hannah will be the storyteller. But before that, we welcome Hannah.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
It's been a while. It has been a while. Nice earrings.
Thank you.
So before we get into Hannah's delightful tales, I've just been informed that by the Nobel Committee that Bob Dylan has won the 2016 Nobel Prize in Literature, and I don't know what to think
the word
about
might be
that.
Nonplussed.
We were nonplussed. We were flummoxed. We're
considering whether or not we might be outraged. We don't know.
Yeah, I'm not outraged because I don't have anything.
No.
I like it's more the appropriateness of this prize for Dylan than any sort of critique per se of Dylan.
I
like him. But.
I like Bob Dylan too. The 60s, protest music aside, I do like him. In fact, I shouldn't even say aside because I like some of that stuff too. But I mean, I'd have to read the proposal to see what exactly it was that got him.
Well, I can just the quick summary is that the Nobel Prize in Literature for 2016 is awarded to Bob Dylan, quote, for having created new poetic expressions within the great American song tradition.
See, that sounds like bullshit to me, but
I mean, I think in terms of like influence, because a lot of times I think the prize is given to writers who, well, I don't know. I'd have to like do a survey. The really great ones are not the ones who get the Nobel Prize. First of all, there's a tier above the prize of people who are too cool for the Nobel Prize. That does exist. But then within,
I'm sure that I'm one of those people.
This podcast is a perfect example of something that is too good for the Nobel Prize. Like Hemingway got it, right? Faulkner got it, and I think what kind of unsettles me about Dylan getting it, because at this point I think a lot of his songs are a little almost like cliche, maybe.
But maybe
but
he's
that's
the one
a sign of them being good too.
He created them. If he created a cliche, maybe I don't know. Perhaps
exactly. Like Shakespeare.
Nobody reads Faulkner or Hemingway anymore, and some people still listen to Bob Dylan. Maybe that's why.
That's true, but like that's kind of my point. Like I feel like what I'm getting at is I think that there seems it almost seems to be a kind of like abandonment of longer genres and of the book in particular. So I think it's hard to maybe. I mean, a lot of poets have won the Nobel Prize, so poetry it does pretty well with a Nobel Prize, and I can see that, but I feel like there's a certain abandonment of the book and thinking about literature in relationship to like the material book and longer narratives that makes me a little sad. Not a lot sad, but just a little.
Well, I'm going to. Perhaps it's good that you're sad already because this is going to be a kind of perhaps tragic podcast. I'm taking a step back from my.
Sorry, as soon as you say that, I'm immediately amused.
Well, let's see if that keeps. Maybe that'll be my challenge.
Okay. Oh wow, you're gonna try to not be funny.
Well, I mean, there might be comedic parts. I can't help myself, but we'll see. Maybe I'll reach a new level today.
Or descend. Well, what are you drinking? Because red wine is great for general melancholy.
It's a Malbec. I think it's Alamos. I don't know. I like this one. Yeah.
That's the one they sell at
I think I might
7-Eleven.
Well, I got this one at Safeway, but I'm sure they also sell it at 7-Eleven. And
It's solid.
that's fine. That's fine with me. I mean,
love
if I can get a
7-Eleven.
decent wine for $5 or $6, I'm certainly not going to turn my nose up at it. In fact, I would prefer that to a decent wine for $30 or $40 any day.
I don't believe anymore, at least in this country, in decent wines for $5 or $6. But if that is that how much it cost? Because it costs $10 here or 12.
No, it was like $11.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. Well, I haven't had beer in a while, but I have a little bit of work to do tonight, and so I didn't really want. Oh, that was scary. This whole screen went white. Did you see that? Did you see that white terror reflected on my face?
No, I didn't.
And then I get sucked in, and then I appear next to you.
And then you were actually in the other room all this time. Well, you don't have a lot of time, and so we'll push through this then.
Okay.
So
yes.
I'll be ready as soon as you are ready to start.
I was just going to say that I'm drinking a local brew, a Goose Island IPA with bright citrus aromas and a bold hop finish.
I like bold hop finishes.
It's the best kind of finish.
I like any kind of bold finish, I think. All right, story one. The tentative topic that I have chosen, and I say tentative because there's a lot of different things I think kind of going on, but I'll focus on art as exploitation, perhaps appropriate, coinciding with Bob Dylan's nomination and winning of. So, story one. A long time ago, though not so long as that people were very much different from how they are today, 6 blind men lived in a barn. These blind men were travelers. The barn was a temporary residence, as was Pied Saint Anne, the village in which it stood. They lived in this particular barn because a great painter was going to paint them in a picture. The 6 blind men did not know why anyone would want to paint them, but the painter had promised to feed them if they agreed, and besides, they had never been painted before, nor knew anyone who had. Someone told the 6 blind men that they would be painted stumbling and falling and screaming, but could not say if they should practice ahead of time. After the painting, the 6 blind men were led to breakfast. A boy took them behind a barn to defecate, only it was not behind a barn at all, but on the village green. Distrustful of their devious guide, the 6 blind men decided to find the painter's house on their own. Their designated leader was the eldest of the 6. This they deduced because he had the fewest teeth, a man called Ripalus. On good days, Ripalus could distinguish if the sun was shining even without feeling its warmth. They wandered in many directions and stumbled and hurt themselves until at last they arrived at the painter's house. They were greeted by the painter's maid and the painter's gardener, who positioned them in view of the painter's window. They were told to join hands and stumble, one after the other, off a bridge into a watery ditch. This they must do over and over again until the painter had captured the most relevant details. It was also important, they were told, to scream. For hours, the 6 blind men screamed and stumbled and fell into the ditch, and became very tired and cold, until the gardener had to lift them from the ditch so that they could fall into it again. The 6 blind men asked the painter why he wanted to paint them, but the painter said that their question was too big for him to answer. The painter was satisfied with his work, and told the 6 men he did not need them anymore. Thus dismissed, the blind men again wandered for hours in many directions until they were returned to their barn. Events that you see this painting before you, this most magnificent rendering of Matthew of the disciples' words, "Leave them, they are blind guides of the blind. If a blind man leads a blind man, both will fall into a pit." Of story 1, to be followed by a dramatic reading of story 1, which is accompanied by Johann Sebastian Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 in G by Kevin MacLeod. MacLeod.
Just keep saying it.
That's MacLeod.
No one knows what's going on anymore. just lull us into a fitful copyright
Nuclear.
slumber.
And so, please let me know if you can hear it.
Actually,
This is on
turn it down
dulcimer.
maybe a bit.
Better?
Yes.
Okay. So you want to paint them screaming, the good friend says. Not to us, but in the other direction. Yes, screaming, the painter says. And at the window, he explains to his good friend that, ever since he was a child, he's been hoping to portray convincingly one day the human scream, and with a picture like that to make all other pictures he painted forgettable. Also, all the pictures painted by other people. Into this concluding and ultimate picture, he'd like to put everything he had to say about the world, but so far he hadn't been able to paint a picture like that. And the scream, what's the scream? The friend asks. Well, the scream is naturally the terror, the cause of which I willingly confess, the painter says, I haven't till now looked for patiently enough. And he starts to walk again. But he wants to look for it. And when he wants to paint the scream, he also wants to paint the terror, what can be seen of the terror. The way, for instance, the mouth changes when it screams. Yes, that interests him. He's fascinated by the arch of the mouth cavity, the position of the teeth, the condition of the gums, the shaping of the lips, the colorings, the discolorings of the palate. On the other hand, admittedly, he'd like to have painted a smile sometime, but hadn't been able to do that either. And why does he stress the terror so much at the expense of everything else? Terror? Ah, does he really do that? He doesn't feel it that way at all. Whatever people call terror is the element he lives in. Certainly he doesn't want to give people a fright, far from it. And he doesn't make too much of it either. He simply brings together what people, not wanting to think about what's terrible, fail to see. On the other hand, the friend is right. He too sometimes wonders, while painting, in what house, in what room, among what people, for heaven's sake, would your picture be in the right place, be at least endurable? Because at that moment, he can't imagine such a place, such a wall, for the pictures he paints, must paint. Then he asks how things are in Ghent, in the southern provinces. Slaughter, the good friend says. And the slaughter in the Liege? Still going on. You see, the painter says, and probably he puts his hands over his ears, wanting not to hear the details of the slaughter. So should we scream now, we ask, and we're probably on the bridge. Yes, the maid says, scream now. Ah! We scream, oh, and and no, don't. And slowly we get into the swing of it, becoming more independent and noisy. And we hear how the screams escape from us and float around us. And after they've settled over us, our shoulders, our heads, and have enveloped us for long enough, spread out across the country, and settle over the neighborhood. Of course, this doesn't stop the world, but it does seem to be listening. That is the ending of my dramatic reading, as I'm interrupted by my cat bursting through the door.
It was, I think, yeah, he heard the ow and the o and
I
the no.
must
Came
save you.
to make sure you're okay. This is fantastic. I have many questions and comments already.
I thought you'd like that.
Reminds me of there's a particular, well, we'll talk about it later. I'm ready for my next more stories.
All right.
Bang my little forks on the table here. Bang my stories.
Okay. A long time ago, in a land now called another name, there was a monastery known for its choir. Its numbers were few, only 10 monks in the choir remained, and they were very old. Unlike their holy brothers, the 10 sounded, when they spoke, like little boys, and when they sang, like sweet angels. Now there is a word for men such as this, but then there was none, or if there was, it has been lost to time. In those days, a bloody war raged across the countryside. Every man in the nearby village was either dead or fighting, so no one was left to defend the monastery when Roman mercenaries struck. By a week's time, stores were depleted, and when there was no food or drink or cattle left, the Romans became bored and violent. Gathered in secret to scheme a plan to save themselves from their captors. They decided that the choir would sing for the soldiers, and when they became entranced by song, the rest of the monks, who were younger and swifter of foot, would escape. So decided, a concert was hosted, and the Romans came because in their travels they had heard of the magnificent monastery choir. Monks sang to their captors for many hours, and the Romans were so entranced by their angelic voices that the other monks escaped the monastery unnoticed. When the mercenaries realized how they'd been tricked, they were enraged. Thanks to the choir, save 2. These 2 the soldiers took from the monastery back to Rome as gifts to their masters. For this reason, there are castratti in the south, in Italy and Germany and France, but not in the north, not in Norway. It is also for this reason that the oldest hymn of the Roman castratti choirs are Nordic. Go to Rome, go to the Sistine Chapel, and you will hear. And so in story 2, followed by my excerpt.
You don't have a choir of castrati that you can bring out?
No, actually,
that would be appropriate.
It would, except that no such recording exists. There's only one recording with castrati left on planet Earth, and
Really?
It's just one person singing Ave Maria in the eeriest voice you could possibly imagine. So I will hold off on the music that I've selected for my reading until towards the excerpt, when it would be most appropriately placed. So, here's the excerpt. We speak very little. Our voices, when they are not singing, unsettle our brothers. We are also old, and leave excitement and fear to the young for carrying. Then it is decided, they say. Yes, they respond, it must be so. And who will close the wooden doors? Brother Bruegel will close the doors. So we will stay, we ask? Yes. Do you understand, Brother Bruegel asks us? You will sing while I close the wooden doors. Us, we ask, and sit there. Yes, who else? And when we are done singing, we ask? Pray. We can't, we exclaim at once. They wince at our words, at their pitch, so high, like children pleading with them. Why not? Because God won't know our voices unless we are singing. Then sing your prayers. We can't do that either, we say. We have not rehearsed them. Quiet, Brother Bruegel says. You're always contradicting. It upsets everything, all this contradiction. All right, we say. We'll be quiet. So we'll be quiet. So we'll go swing. Blah, blah, blah. So we'll be quiet. So we'll go sing. And nobody holds us back either, as we shuffle, not pushed, towards the choir screen. The soldiers are gathered round the screen, standing or sitting on the floor. We look neither right nor left, but shuffle straight. Gudbrand, the last of us, carries the thurible. He swings it so clouds of incense trail us slowly up the steps. Our feet drag on the floor. The soldiers make suspicious noises, but why should they? We don't look much. The last of us is in line then, shoulders to shoulder, and we open our mouths towards heaven and close our eyes and listen to the silence, each of us to his own. And we imagine to ourselves the fields and the hearths of old homes, all the places we've been separated from since boyhood, enveloped in our silence. And then, lilting out of our lungs, past gaps in our teeth, past whiskers, bursts forth the voice. Brother Bruegel faces us from the door, behind the soldiers. It will be the last time he sees us, we think. A horde of Romans surrounds us, 10 grizzled old men with long arms and unrivaled lung power, pushing through our small, child-sized vocal cords. And so ends the dramatic reading of story 2.
Excellent. Man, I feel like I'm influencing you because this seems like something I would have chosen.
Really?
But I mean, not to diminish or appropriate or anything, but I dig it. I dig them both. I dig the concepts. I dig the implementation. I'm trying to think of a shorter title or a more shorter category than art as exploitation, um, but yeah, I mean that does sum it up pretty nicely. So in the first story, albeit there are some differences in tone, uh, that are worth noting, even though that they are, like, in certain ways, I think very similar in their exploration of this theme. So in the first story, it's almost like a fable. We have this, we're kind of out of time and out of a particular place, and no one is really named. So there's this fable or like fairy tale or like dark fairy tale quality that, because it seems to almost like occur in some sort of weird void, except for the reference to the Bible, which is the only thing that anchors it almost in like a any kind of recognizable, like familiar history or something. But there's aspects of it that like made me think of a Beckett play or something, especially because of the impairment of the subjects. But yeah, we can get into it later. So there's six blind men who live in a barn. Already kind of an absurdist situation, but the logic is that they're being blind or also poor, and they've been promised, and they believe this, food in exchange for undergoing this really uncomfortable and seemingly senseless and quite humiliating ritual. Almost, it's not totally ritualized, but it's kind of repetitive, of being an object for this painter, who lives quite comfortably. Apparently he has a maid and a gardener, so there's these little details that suggest that the painter is not like a struggling bohemian. He's not a beatnik painter.
No, he's not.
he's
he's not in the 60s or the 50s either.
No. He's sort of a kind of a plump little bourgeois painter, but he's intellectualized this notion of terror, and he's intellectualized the body so that he could even in his analysis of details and of like just observable realities that are without any kind of affect at all, he seems to go on to like dissect certain expressions or experiences of like human anguish in terms of like the mouth. So there's this great description of like the mouth and the palate and the position, and how like you could break all this down into something that's totally devoid of like the sentiment that you would associate with it. But there's this idea, however, that terror or horror or something is kind of his natural dwelling place or his starting point, and then from that starting point he gets even more grotesque, but and then it all becomes like a biblical scene, which I think is kind of like the little twist at the end, is that this incredibly kind of heartless sadistic practice is being used for like a biblical painting. And that's something that you also see in the second one. So like there's a certain sense of like the painter is committed to this, like, he's looking for something. He has this intellectual project or this personal project that's artistic. He's not doing it for money because he seems to be living quite well. So it's not monetary exploitation, but there's this sense that the church as an institution is somehow implicated in this. I think one of the great things is the kind of like the innocence and the description of the blind men. And another thing that they both had in common, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about this, is like the narration in the first person plural, which produces a kind of weird tragicomic effect. I don't know is that consistent in both of them, or is that just in some of the moments?
It's in both. It's very consistent in both. Yeah.
Kafka does that actually.
Yeah,
too.
It's taking a topic or a group that is wholly other by any kind of society standards, and then that's the only perspective, and it's a collective perspective that you're provided throughout the whole story. And it does lend itself to comedy, and it lends itself to a certain tragedy and poignancy, I think.
Well, poignancy because you get the sense that by being ostracized, they've kind of like de facto had to really bond. So there's a sense of a very strong camaraderie that's just forced on them by being marginalized. But there's also this kind of monstrosity that I get with it beyond, tragic or comic, of this kind of amorphous composite being that is both like many and one, like have you ever seen the 13th Warrior?
Yeah.
Like the five of them, this
The
kind of
five
thing
of them.
that comes down and it's like this.
They nod on the bodies.
But yeah, this like sweeping generalization as though everyone were identical and that everyone were different. And it's used anytime you present like a really other kind of, like you're saying, wholly other tribe or something, they always have this weird unsettling sense of being like all different yet all the same. That is, I don't think it attenuates the kind of pathetic, horror of the situation, but it creates it contributes to this kind of like monstrous atmosphere. So that was the first one, which in the whole thing, the painter's trying to capture something, but then when we imagine, or at least I imagine, have you seen like a Francis Bacon painting ever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this idea of so Francis Bacon, who created these kind of distorted, monstrous, screaming, agonic characters that are like smushed or deflated or like decomposing or like the really horrific kind of paintings, and what he's kind of working against is this idea of like abstract art, which he considered any abstract art to just be he called it decoration. Only figure drawings. I had to portray something, which was kind of going against the grain at the time. And no one wants that on their walls. Like, no one wants a Francis Bacon painting on their walls to look at all the time.
It's like, where would it be appropriate?
Yes. So
where could it be endured?
Yeah. So exactly, like the whole market of of home decor is completely off limits already. It can only be in museums or in someone who's like quite fucked up house. But then it turns out to not be a Francis Bacon painting, but rather an interpretation of Jesus and a scene from Matthew. And so all of a sudden there's this, I thought that was like a really kind of changed my relationship with the story. And then bringing us to the second one, where we have we're assuming we're in the Dark Ages here. We get a little bit more contextual clues because there's this church or Catholic group, and then they've been sacked or invaded by the Romans. So we're thinking like late Roman Empire, when the Christians were being persecuted, or were kind of like a persecuted minority, but also somewhat institutionalized. Is that right?
Yeah, roughly.
Kind of like a Dark Ages kind of situation. So, and there the we is much more like pronounced, and the tone in the excerpt seemed like they had a sense of mission and purpose. So the other guys, like the blind men, have no idea what's going on, and they're just kind of being made to do these things, and they describe them in this really neutral tone. But then these guys seem to have this, because they're part of a logic that they seem to understand, and that even in this kind of unempowered situation, there's this sense of like a ritualistic crescendo which culminates in this eruption of song. So I mean, do they seem, who has the higher hand here? It was kind of hard to tell, like, because the Romans have invaded and they have to like sing for their supper, so to speak, or sing to protect themselves. But like who wins? Who overcomes? And like, is there like a resistance in this expression of song, or is it?
I think you have to go back with that question to the position that they're in. As castrated singing monks of other, even within their own monastery. They are other, and they're also very old, and they are the sacrificial lamb so that the other monks may escape. And it seems, based on the discussion, that they didn't have much say in the matter, but senile, and they're going along with it anyway. Mm-hmm. But so no, I don't know that they're aware of of winning at anything. But I think that there is a moment when they're singing and they know that their brothers are escaping, where there is a sense maybe of self-realization, or at least
Okay. Or like
investigation.
that was another thing that I maybe I didn't catch or something, but like because I so they're kind of left as like are they left as a distraction or is it an agreement? They're left as a distraction.
Well, they're there when their other monks make the plan, and then the decision is kind of made without their input, and then they're just told, and they kind of go along with it as a very young child would. Oh, are we? I suppose. Okay, we will. And it's emphasized even then when they exclaim over being told to pray, and it's in the voice of a child, which is unsettling to the other monks, but they're like, yes, you will. And then they follow along with it.
Interesting. Because here, I mean, well, again, like the notion of art and the religious institution are conflated because you have these kind of two competing players and then these guys in the middle. But yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought, but I feel like the relationship, but like I don't know if the ultimate end with the castrati even can be described as art because it seems their function is so explicitly religious. But then they're used more as like a political tool in a time of war. So it's kind of like what we associate the artistry in the excerpt, like that's where the like art kind of comes in the sense of song, which seems to like, especially because the way it was maybe set up with the reading too, this notion of a song which kind of triumphs over everything at the last minute is like this little glimmer of I don't know, nobility or beauty in this totally obscene and dreadful kind of event. So it's almost like the art is like an independent agent that has nothing to do with the exploitation. Whereas like in the first one, the artist is the artist, he's the painter, and he's clearly using them as an object to as a means of representing something he wants, and then something that's also like being also an illustration of a biblical scene. So I just feel like maybe I don't know if I would necessarily consider the second one an instance of the exploitation of art because there's so many other things that are exploiting, basically.
Right. Perhaps the exploitation of people in the name of art would be.
Yeah, but it's not in the name of art. It's in the name of like God or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, obviously the idea is to maintain their voice in a certain way that conforms with certain notions of like harmony or something like that. But yeah, I think just like, because the church is so much more present and because it's such a more remote time, especially kind of set up with the end, like we don't really even know the term for, and you don't use the term castrati, it's not, at least in this excerpt, it's not mentioned, right? It's weird. It's implied very artfully that they're probably eunuchs, but it's not explicitly stated ever.
Well, it is mentioned in the end. They mentioned, so this is where castrati come from. This is why they're so prevalent in the South, but they don't exist in the North. But this story happened in the North, so it's almost a pre-castrati story. This is how it came to be. This is how castrati came into being. But it wasn't called that before. It was called something else.
Interesting.
But we don't know what that was.
And they don't exist because they were sort of exterminated quite early before it really caught on, so to speak. And it's really interesting too because like this notion of like early monasteries I've come across before. There's an article that I worked on, and this guy, he was a utopian thinker, and he was looking at ways in which, perfect societies or at least much better societies come into being. And one of his, even though he wasn't really religious, one of his reference points was the early Christian church, because they were essentially little communes. And then gradually these little communes developed and became a dominant religion and eventually a kind of a world order. So in a way, you could think of it as a successful utopian initiative, right? This idea of a Catholic universal brotherhood and all these things, right? It's like Christendom. Like
yes, well, as things grow, they morph into something else.
Right, and power corrupts.
Yeah, there's that.
But I think it was just because maybe, and I don't know if that's a subtext that's remotely relevant or not, but there's like this kind of weird idealicness that this particular text definitely resists, but you also see kind of the church on the defending end, at least before it becomes as dominant as it would be in these internal kind of betrayals and stuff. So yeah, I am. All right, well, should I guess so you can tell me about them?
Yes, if you are ready, then you should go for it.
All right, well, you definitely could have written either, for sure. My sense is that what is it? I need to think about what my actual justification is going to be for this. I keep getting all these Google notifications that I'm supposed to be doing things that I'm not doing. I don't even know why I put them in the calendar. Then I just feel annoyed. My sense is that all right, well, I'll just I don't know if I can describe even my logic right now for this. But because the first one reminds me of a specific writer, and I might even know who it is. I doubt it, but I might. Oh, maybe then you really would have tricked me. I don't know. I'll look quite foolish if I go any further. Yeah, I don't know. So I'm gonna say that you wrote the second one.
I did write the second one.
Yay! All right, and so it's okay. I could say that my two rationales. My first one was that you tend to be drawn to religious histories more. So for whatever that's worth. Well, I mean, not tend to. That's maybe that's not statistically valid. That one time you did that thing. Where I was thinking of the one about the Mormon church.
Yeah, I thought you might think about that one.
And so, yeah, which it's just impossible not to be drawn to like these weird religious institutional intrigues outsider's perspective that we somehow occupy and which I share with you. And then the first one sounds so much like there's this director. And he did Bruges. I'm gonna do something kind of cheaty, and I'm gonna look up. I just want to look up the guy. No, I just want to look up the guy's name because there's a movie called Bruges, and I know that the guy who wrote that is also the guy who did a play that I saw. And this play that I saw reminds me very much of the first story in Bruges. Martin McDonagh. So it reminded me of something by Martin McDonagh. But is it by Martin McDonagh?
No.
Oh man, that would have been. I would have gotten like a bonus point or something.
I would have been very good if you had. No. So it's called The Parable of the Blind, and it's by Gert Hofmann. And it was written in German and it was translated. He wrote this in 1985. Hoffmann, Hofmann. And he
two N's. Thank you.
He based two N's at the end. Yes, he based it on an actual painting painted by a man called Peter Bruegel the Elder, who painted it in, I want to say 1538 or something. And
yes, not to be confused with Peter Bruegel the Younger. For sure, who was much younger.
Yes, although he did have two sons who became painters, and one of them became very friendly with Rubens, the painter famous for like
Rubens,
those ladies. Yeah, Rubens, yes.
Rubens, yes, I know. There's only one of him, and yet no,
not and the artist, not the sandwich. To be sure,
to clarify, there was no Thousand Island dressing involved in Rubens' work. Oh, that would be really funny.
It would be great. So it was based off of, I think, that same line that was quoted from Matthew. But Gert Hofmann saw this painting, and based off of just this painting, he created this whole backstory about how the blind men came to be painted, and then what they did after, and what it was to be blind in Belgium in the 1540s, and
as a method, I absolutely love that. I love that method because it is a method. Like there's a tactic, but there's so much creativity involved, and it makes you enjoy the visual product so much more.
It's incredible. So after reading the story and looking at the painting, I was very mind blown. I felt like I was trying to guess which character was which, because there's only a couple of the blind men who are attributed names within the story, and it's always the us and the we and the our. Even though one of them is even singled out as being not really one of us because of how he became blind. And it's a really great read. Plus, because it was a translation from the German, I feel there's a certain heaviness in the language there. There's kind of a direct da 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 da, and then and this, and it lends itself to humor and to tragedy, I feel, in equal measure when you write that way. So that was something I attempted to carry over.
It came across, I thought, really well. I think the excerpt that you chose too was really good, and that because of the fable like quality, which also is kind of a Germanic thing. I was thinking of like Brothers Grimm.
It's a parable. Like yeah.
So it lends itself to summary very well because there's this sort of, very clear arc that one can follow in a way, but that's not like, too formulaic. There's a Thomas Bernhard, who's been featured on this podcast, has an entire novel that's I think I might have told you this, but called Old Masters. And Old Master it's basically about a guy who goes to a painting every day in the same museum because he can't find what's wrong with it. And he must find what's wrong with it. And the whole novel just kind of like surges or sprouts out of this like encounter with the painting. And it's not necessarily that he gives you a backstory so much for the painting, but like the enormous amount of story that is compressed into certain images is like really
so Peter Bruegel the Elder, he this particular painting, and I'll feature it on our website as my picture for the story, but some of his other paintings, so this is just of 6 blind men stumbling into a ditch, the blind leading the blind, but he has these kind of surrealist, it looks like a scene taken out of Army of Darkness with Bruce Campbell. It's literally an army of skeletons battling and slaughtering like a regular army. And then another, which is incredible detailed, and it features some counted as over 105 or 106 different like Belgium metaphors, and it's this town setting. So he was famous for like town settings and painting regular people in a normal village scene, and they've attributed some of his paintings to recognizing how much climate change has affected different parts of the world because he was so specific in his details about just the environment when he was painting. It was really cool.
He's the one who did, I think, The Fall of Icarus, right? Where it's just a bunch of people like mowing basically, and it's like and then in the background, and it is a tiny little detail, is there's just the leg of Icarus sticking out of the water as like just this, the quotidian totally takes over the mythological, and it's extremely funny. I think it would have to be funny. He can't not have wanted that to not be funny.
I don't know, but it was I did see that one too. So he's pretty awesome. I got really into his painting after that. I could see why Gert Hofmann would have been attracted to one of his pieces. So it was kind of hard to try to go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say there's a sorry, I'm a bad interrupter. But there's when I was in college, I studied Russian, and I did my undergrad thesis on this group of like I always like Bohemians, but I did my thesis on this like Bohemian group in St. Petersburg in like the early to mid 80s, right when the Soviet Union was kind of in its final death throes or whatever. But so they'd created their own little mythos and their own little tiny world. But the Icarus painting was like their constant reference point. They were totally fascinated by this like pathetic failure, and that painting they talked about all the time. So that one, that's why I know that one. But he's enormously productive apparently as a painter. This is why you need to look at Bosch. You need to see some Bosch paintings.
Yes, I still haven't looked at that. And I thought about when you told me to look him up when I was looking at Bruegel, because I imagine he has these kind of mythical creatures too that are supposed to symbolize like the seven sins and amidst like slaughter. And I mean, I think he died right before the 80-year war started. So he was used to being surrounded by intense violence.
And for our listeners who, in their ignorance, don't know what war you're talking about.
So just before the Spanish Inquisition.
And for our listeners who...
Don't ask me more questions. I'll become steadily more specific sounding.
It was before the War of the Seven Roses, but after the Treaty of Utrecht.
So think So think Renaissance, between the Renaissance and the Baroque period. So you're thinking 1550s to the 1600s.
There we go, some numbers.
And the end of the Renaissance. And then the Baroque, which is actually when
you were out of Monet.
When the castrati came into being, really significantly.
Really?
Especially in the Roman Church. It was towards the end of the Renaissance. All through, they were really big in the Baroque. They became really big in the Classical, and then towards the end of the Classical, they started to die out. But it was like policy within the Roman Catholic Church. They had whole choirs of castrati.
Well, Catholicism seems to be really big into like preventing sex one way or the other.
You could be excommunicated for castration or castrating, but they were always looking for, new members of their castrated choirs. And so magically there were like thousands of castrations of small boys in countries where this was common, just to hope that one of them would get into a high position, either in the opera, where they were huge. In fact, a lot of Mozart's original works, including The Messiah, was written specifically for castrated men. Up until like the 1720s, 1730s, when it was absolutely annoying. After that, and the last castrati known sang in the Vatican. He was part of the original Castrati Vatican Choir, and he died in 1922. And he's the one who has the one gramophone recording that remains in existence of a castrati singing opera, which you can find on YouTube.
Which I'm going to listen to very soon.
It's super creepy, because it doesn't sound like, he's a full-grown man. He was in like his 40s or his 50s when he sang it. But it doesn't even sound like a little boy, and it doesn't sound like a woman singing at all. It's like this bizarre, creepy, I don't know. It's very eerie. It's hard to describe, but it's extremely eerie. And there's a lot of operas that they don't even perform now because they were written for castratis, and that range doesn't really exist anymore.
That's so interesting. How did you pick this topic? Where you were just thinking about art that's like really just exploited some people, and then you were like, oh man, castrati, that would suck. Like, how did you...
Well, no, I was thinking, I wanted to think of exploitive art, yes, and I didn't want to go with visual art or painting. And then I was thinking of people who, it just, in the parable of the blind, it focuses on the blind. And I was originally thinking of like lepers in Louisiana, actually. So I learned that the only leper colony and leper asylum that exists in the U.S. is in Louisiana, or at least was.
I think I would have guessed that. I don't know why, but if you asked me to guess which state,
Louisiana, yes.
Louisiana.
But it's carried by armadillos. Did you know that? Leprosy is the only animal they know of that's transferred from armadillos to human beings. Like the plague in gophers. It's weird. Anyway, I almost
didn't know
went with
either.
that.
Really?
Yeah, that's why there's still plague in a lot of the Midwest, because gophers carry it, and they're little
like the Black Plague, like bubonic plague.
Yes, bubonic
it's
plague.
Carried by gophers. Mm-hmm. I thought it was fleas and then rats and then ports.
Well, that's how it spread in Europe, but that's where it exists now in the U.S. It's in gophers. Anyway, I almost went with that.
It really changes my relationship with the gopher.
Well, I hope it doesn't ruin anything too badly for you. But then I didn't want to do something U.S.-based, and I thought about, I was thinking about religiously exploitive art, which is what he used. He focused on a religious parable. And then I was thinking about artistic religious exploitation. I remembered something about monks being castrated so that they kept before puberty, so that they still had like these childlike vocal cords, but they had the lung capacity of an adult man. And that was like the eeriest, creepiest image for me. And I started looking into the history of it, and it was fascinating.
Especially when you consider the weird hypocrisy and the total like how it preys particularly on like the poor and the desperate.
Yeah, you had families. They were taking their, I guess, barbers who are also surgeons in this time would perform castrations on these small boys. Although there were some children who volunteered for it too. It's exactly like kickboxing in the Philippines. They'll bet on children kickboxing, children fighting, and the families will train their kids for it because you can make a lot of money.
Yeah, and I mean,
successful kickboxer, but they're like 6 or 7 or 8 years old.
The resources of, because I would mean these are not wealthy people usually. These are people
they're very poor
who are out of options.
Not all of them. Some of them were aristocrats. The very, very famous ones. There was like, I want to say his name was Farinini or something, and he was he came from a very aristocratic family, and he
castrati or a Filipino kickboxer?
Castrati.
Oh, okay.
In the 1720s. And then apparently there's a film, and there was about that particular dude. And then there was also one of the reasons they were ostracized, even though they were like super big deal in opera, they were the original opera drama queen, was that their sexuality, which I would think would be the only thing you didn't have to worry about with the castrati. They were looked on as like dangerous because they would convert men to homosexuality, and there's this really weird history with them.
Poor understanding of how homosexuality would work.
It does, but then in the film, from what I can understand of the film about it, called castrati, it's like this seductive man on stage singing in this woman's voice. It doesn't actually sound like a castrati's voice, based on what I heard. But all of the men in the audience with their wigs are going, ooh, oh my goodness, and it's anyway.
Yeah, because of just the feminization in general. I mean, any kind of category, any person that doesn't fit into a neat category is historically problematic for states and societies and stuff. So that, I mean, that's, I'm just imagining, because there's stories of, for example, Roberto Bolaño, this Chilean writer who's been translated and has become popular in recent years. He has this story called Ojo Silva, and basically a guy talks about kind of a weird religious brothel somewhere in India. It's not really clear exactly where, but like basically it only kept like mutilated children or something there, and it was a way of getting money. So families would do horrible things to the small boys and then send them there, and then they would be preyed upon by tourists or something like that. So I mean, it's like the most like, it's totally grotesque and horrifying. It's a fascinating story, but I mean, it will mess with you in terms of like the depravity and especially the ways like certain children were preyed upon. So yeah, just the sense of which the church being like, oh, this is not something you should do, but if you do it, we'll pay you.
Like indulgences.
Yes.
And a million other things. So.
Although I like the notion of indulgences personally. At least it makes some sense. It's a great fundraising tool.
Yeah, totally.
So I can follow that. Well, other yeah, the music really good for both also. Especially, I mean, this is the danger when you use music really well, is that whichever one seems to have better placed music is more likely the one that was written for this podcast.
Well, that's the problem, because I actually, when you called to say you could still do the podcast today, I hadn't selected music for the second one because I didn't know how. But I came across this group of women on the Free Music Archive who I think that they're Bulgarian. It was like Bulgarian opera. And I'm like, sure, that's close enough. I'll go with it. But it can't have them singing the whole time. Just the one part.
Yeah, no, but it needed to be something kind of like ethereal and otherworldly, but also kind of simple. And I think it worked. It worked quite well. Well, I think we're coming up on an hour or something like that. So I will let you go. These are really good. So I'm looking forward to them
I'm glad
being
you enjoyed them. I'm
public.
looking forward to
Yeah.
not having to write for a little bit and then listening to yours.
Oh,
That'll be
right. Yeah.
fun.
I gotta think of something. But this is good because I think, always kind of, I feel like we kind of, or at least I mooch off of you for inspiration. But I feel like there's a kind of a ricocheting sometimes and stuff. So we've been more contemporary for a while. And I think this is pushing me to go like back in time a little bit. So probably expect some historical pieces.
No, that's fair. I like the historical stuff. It makes me do more research, and I always learn a lot when I do these things.
You know
I
all this
also,
stuff about the
yeah.
plague and leprosy and castrati,
Well, I already knew
and
the
opera.
plague stuff, but I didn't know the leprosy stuff or the opera stuff. So yes, I'm developing myself. Mm.
Yes, develop
Mm.
away, develop away. Maybe you someday will be a singer, songwriter, traveler who becomes a Nobel Prize winner.
Like Bob Dylan.
Because you never know.
You never know. Apparently not.
Everything is possible in this world.
Oh God, I'm gonna have to research that. Okay.
Yeah.
All
All right.
right.
I'll
Well,
talk to you later.
all right. Bye bye.
All right. Good night and good luck and Godspeed, listener.